All right, so currently when we select a city from our application here, you can see this takes a few seconds for this to all load in properly. Now, instead of it just abruptly loading in, we're going to create a loading icon here in the center until the loading has been completed, and then we'll display the information here on this view. Now, before we actually do that, there is one small thing I want to fix, which, as you can see here, when we click on a city, we have this nasty box shadow that is present until the background color loads in, and then it looks fine. So to actually eliminate or get rid of that box shadow until this color loads in, what we want to do is head over to our navigation component. And since we're also going to be using these classes in our weather component here later on, we want to move them first of all. So we want to remove them from a navigation component here. And we want to toss them here in our app.view or our global styling. Now, that doesn't actually resolve the box shadow issue, but since we are using the class of add city and then day and night on our header, we can actually remove the box shadow from our header here and then simply add them to our add city class and then also our day and our night. And this will go ahead and resolve the issue of that box shadow being present before that class color is initialized or actually added to this view. So as you can see there now, that looks a lot better. So to actually get our loading icon in here, let's head back over to our project, and inside of our view component, we need to add some markup to our template. So we no longer need this h4, so we're going to create a new class here, or a new div with the class of main. Now inside of here, we're going to be utilizing this loading variable, and only when this loading is true do we want to set the loading icon to be present. So we're going to actually create the loading icon using some CSS. So this will just be the markup, and then we'll go ahead and get into actually creating that. So what we want to say here is create a div with the class of loading, and we only want to display this class if, not v4, let's see here, and say only show this if loading is true. And then inside of this div, we want to create a span. Okay. Now, if this is false, so say loading is no longer true and it is false because, as you can see, once this function of get weather is completed, we set this to false, then at that point do we want to show the actual components for this weather view that we're creating. Now what I mean by components are going to be this right here. So we have our current view component, we have our hourly weather component, our forecast component, and then we also have the additional info, and those are going to store. So let's go ahead and create another div for this. So outside or after the loading class here, or loading div, we're going to create a new div with a class of weather, and inside of here we're going to say another div with the class of weather wrap, and here is where we're going to store those components. Now we only want to show this if this is false, so we're going to say v if this, if not then show this with a v else clause here on this div. Okay, so now also we want to utilize, like I said, the same kind of styling here for our weather component, or our weather class here and our weather component. So what I'm going to do is we're going to copy this class structure here, or this class binding, and we're going to use it here on this div of weather. Okay, now to use these is day and is night values, we have to do some v binding. So what we can do is in our app.view, we can simply copy this from a navigation and then insert it here on our router. And then we need to come over to our props and accept them in here. So we're going to say is day and is nights. All right, so now we have access to use these. Now for the styling for this, I'm going to actually copy this in. And what we're going to do is remove this h4 here, and that's the wrong one. Let me just copy this in here. And what we need to do also is for the style tag, we don't have this set to use SCSS, so we'll say that, and then we want this to be scoped. All right, so what we're doing here is we're creating an animation here on the loading class. And what the animation is just a simple transform and rotating it 360 degrees. And then for this actual whole class itself, we are centering it in the page by giving it a width and height of 100%. And then aligning the items to the center using justify content and align items and setting those both to center. Now for our span, which is inside of the loading class, this is where we're actually creating the, I guess you want to say, icon that we have spinning on our page. So how we're doing this is we're giving it a width and height of 60. We are centering it using the margin 0 auto. And for the actual appearance of it, you can see we're going to give it a border of 2 pixels solid transparent, and then we only want to give the border top a color of this dark blue we're using here, and then we're going to make it a circle by defining a border radius of 50%. And then we are actually calling the animation we created up here by saying animation spin, which is the name we gave it, and we want this to be ease, and we want the duration to be 1000 milliseconds, and we're setting this to infinite. All right, now for our weather here, we have the height and width being 100%, and we have overflow set to scroll. And then for the weather wrap, we are doing something similar. We have overflow hidden, max width of 1024 pixels, and a margin 0 of auto. Okay, so now if we save this and we head over to our application here, let me just go ahead and back out and refresh it. We should see now when we click on a city, we're going to get the spinning icon until the until our function of get weather has completed, and then we will be shown here this view with our background color and then our header. So then with that complete, let's begin to build our components here for this view. So what we're going to do to start off here is we're going to create a new file in our components folder, and we're going to say current weather.view. Okay, so this is actually going to be our component for the current weather, which is going to be this component right here, which has the name of the city, the current temperature, the high and the low, the description of what the condition is outside, and then the feels like. And on the right hand side here, we have an icon. We're only going to be using 2 for this component. Now, if you want to add more based on the actual conditions, you're more than welcome to, but for this application I only did 2, which is going to be the sun and then the moon for nighttime. All right, so heading back over here, let's go ahead and just start by calling or creating a div here with the class of current weather. All right, and we're going to save that. We'll give it a name here, and we'll say current weather, and actually we'll capitalize that too to match the name here. Now, what we want to do first off here is actually import this component to be able to use it inside of our weather view here. So what we're going to do is just below the import of our database, we're going to import the current weather component, and we're going to say from, we'll say components, and then current weather. And then what we need to do is we don't have, or we're not using any components in this actual file yet, so we need to say components, and then we'll say current weather, add our comma there, and then inside of our weather wrap here, we're going to actually nest this component inside of this div. So we'll go ahead and open up the bracket here and then enter the structure for this, and as you can see now, we'll have our current weather component imported. So for the actual markup here, and one thing I do want to change is the style tag here, so we'll say style and then CSS scoped. Okay, so what we need to do now is, because we are going to be using the current weather data here inside of this component, we also want to do some binding here. So what we're going to do is we're actually also going to be using isDay and isNight as well. So what we're going to do is actually do a simple bind of all these elements on this component, and we're going to be binding isDay to isDay, isNight, and also the current weather. So if we save this and we head over to our current weather component, we want to accept these, so we'll say props, and we'll say is day, is night, and current weather. All right, so now inside of our current weather component, let's begin to work on the markup for this section. So what we want to do is, inside of this current weather div, we're going to have another div with the class of container, and then one more with the class of weather info, or I should not say one more. This is where we're going to have the weather info for the city and then the current temperature. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a span here with the class of city. Now, since we have access to this current weather and all the data, we can actually utilize the name of the current city that we are running this component for. So what we want to do is say this dot current weather and say dot name. All right. And also we want to display the current temperature. So we're going to create another span here with the class of current dash temperature. Okay. Now inside of here, we're going to do the same thing, open up our curly brackets here. And now when we get a return temperature from this API, it is in the form of a decimal. So to avoid getting a decimal value here, we're going to use the math.round, which will go ahead and return us the nearest integer. So it's going to round it for us. So we're going to pass it this dot current weather dot main and say temp. Okay. Now that's going to do it for the weather info. Now we want to create another div which is going to have the high and the low, which is going to be this right here. So we're going to be displaying this using Flexbox. So what we want to do is we're going to have another div, and this is going to have the class name of high dash low temperatures. Now inside of here, we're going to have a div with the class of high. And we are going to be utilizing the Font Awesome library for this. So I'm going to copy in this I class here. We're going to be using a chevron. And for the high, we want that chevron to be up. And then we want to create another span here. Now inside of this span, we're going to be utilizing the math.round again. So we'll say math. Let's go ahead and just uncapitalize it A, math.round. And we're going to pass it this dot current weather dot main, and then we want to say dot temp underscore max. All right, and that's going to be the markup for the high. Now since we're going to be utilizing a similar markup here for the low, we're going to just copy this and we're going to say the class name of low, chevron will be down, and then we want to say instead of temp max, we're going to say temp min. And we also forgot to add the degree symbol here, so we can get the degree symbol by saying an, degree, and then semicolon. Copy and paste that in here, and that's going to be it for the high-low temperatures. Okay. Now, next up, we want to create a span for the condition, which is going to be this right here of overcast clouds, or whatever the current condition in that city is. So we'll give this a span, and we'll have a class name of condition. And inside of here, we're simply going to pass this dot current weather dot weather. Now this is an array, and we want to grab the first returned array. So we're going to say 0, and we're going to pass it the description property that is on this array. Okay, and that's going to be it for that span. And then we also want the feels like. So this is going to have a class of feels like. We'll say feels like, and we'll not capitalize that, and then we'll do our curly brackets here and say math dot round, and we're going to say this dot current weather dot main, and we'll say dot feels underscore like, and then we'll add our degree here. All right, now the final thing we're going to be doing here is our icons for either the day or the night or the sun or the moon. Now just below this span, I'm going to copy this in. So we're going to have a div with a class of weather icon here. Now what we're going to be saying is if is day is true, then we're going to show this image right here. Now if this is not true, then we're not going to show it, and we're going to look and see if is night is true, and if that is equal to true, then we're going to show this moon. Okay, so if we now save this and head over to our application here, we should now see that we have this right here, which obviously does not look good at all. So let's head back over to our project and begin to style this out. Let's begin here by doing a few line breaks to open up our style tag here, and we're going to target first our current weather div. Now inside of here, we want to give this a margin top of 90 pixels, and we want a border. Let's see, border bottom, and we're going to set that to 1 pixel solid and have an RGBA of, let's see here, we're going to do white, so 255, 255, 255, and we want to do a 70% opacity. All right, now let's go ahead and inside of here, we're going to nest our container. So we're going to say container, and for this, we want to give it a margin of 30 pixel 0. We want to give it a min height of 366 pixels. We want the position to be relative, and we're going to display this as flex and also give it a color of white for all the text. And then next up, what we're going to do is outside of the container, we want to target our span here. And for all of our spans, we simply want to set these to have a display of block. And there we go. Next up, we're going to target our weather info here. And for this, we want to give it a padding on the top of 30 pixels. And we're going to give it a flex of 1. Now inside of the weather info, we're going to nest our city, which is a span that we have the city name in. And we want to give this a font size 24 pixels and give it a, if I can type here, and we want to give it a font weight of 500. And then we also want to target our current temperature. And we're going to say here, we want to give this a margin on the top, 40 pixels. Going to give this a font size of 80. And we're going to go a little bit heavier font weight here of 600. And that should do it for our weather info. Okay, next up we're going to actually target the high and low temperature class, or the high and low temperatures, which has our high and low for that city. So we're going to say, my mouse will go back up here, high, low temperatures. And inside of here we want to display these as flex so they go into a row side by side. And we're going to add a gap here of 16 pixels. Man, my typing is just really off today. So next up inside of here, we want to target our high and low. So we're going to target these in the same class here, or the same styling. And we want to display both of these as flex. And then for the span, what we're going to say here is we're going to add a margin left of 8 pixels to separate it from our icon here of the chevron. All right, so that should go ahead and do it for the high and low temperatures. Next up, we want to target our condition here. And for this, what we want to do is give it a text transform and set it to capitalize so that the first letter of each word is capitalized. And we're going to give this a font size of 24 pixels, a font weight of 500, and then a margin here of 60 pixels, 0. So 60 on the top, 0 on the right, 8 pixels on the bottom, and then 0 on the left. Okay, and now for our feels like, we want to add here a font weight of a little bit lighter, which is going to be 400. And then give it a font size, and we'll say a little smaller than default. We're going to say 14 pixels. Okay, now lastly, what we want to do is actually style our weather icon. That's the last thing we need to do here. So we'll say weather icon, and we'll open this up. And what we're going to say here is height 100%. We're going to position this absolute. So let's do this position, and we'll say absolute. We're going to set the right to be minus 180 pixels here. We're going to display this as flex, and we want to align the items to the center. Now for the image itself, not image orientation, for the image itself, we want to give this a fixed width of 366 pixels and then a height of 366 pixels. All right. And I believe that should go ahead and do it for this, this component. So now if we head over to our file here, we should see we have a little bit of an issue. So that means I did something wrong along the way. So let me go ahead and check what that is. I probably mistyped a class name here of some sort. So let me go back through here really quick and see what that issue is. Okay, so the issue was actually back when we were doing the markup here. The weather info is supposed to actually contain the div of high and low temperatures and also the two spans of condition and feels like. So what we want to do is actually extend this div of weather info all the way through these items right here, and that should go ahead and fix our issue. So now if we go over here, we should have this view right here, which looks great, and it mimics the view if I inspect it here to make it look a little more similar to what we have right here. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out by clicking a few different cities here, and let's expand this a little bit. So if we go to Boston, you should see now we get Boston, the current temperature, the high and the low, snow, and feels like, and then we have our sun icon right here. And if we go back out, we click on Warn, we get the same thing. We get all the different information. So there we go. That is our weather. That is our current weather component for our weather view.